I want to thank you for sitting with me tonight. It means more than you know. If my words settle with you, please like this video and subscribe, because sharing these memories isn't easy, especially when I've spent years hiding them behind this mask. The story I'm about to tell didn't start with a scream or a slammed door. It began quietly, almost politely. My husband, Charles, called me around 6:14 p.m. That detail stayed carved in my mind, because the moment I answered, I heard something off in his voice. He said he'd be working late again, but there was a tightness there, the kind that comes when someone rehearses a lie. As soon as the call ended, the silence in my house felt different, too heavy, too aware. I knew a truth was moving toward me, slow but certain, and I had no idea how much it would take from me. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the dim light spilling through my curtains, trying to steady my breath. Charles didn't work late. He never had a reason to. For 30 years, that man came home before sunset like clockwork, dinner plate warm, work stories ready. But lately, something had shifted. He'd grown distant, careful with his phone, quick to step into another room when it buzzed. And tonight, that carefulness felt like a wall he'd built between us. My mask warmed against my skin as anxiety crept up my throat. I reached for my phone with a trembling hand and checked our shared location app, even though I already knew what I'd find. His dot wasn't moving. It wasn't anywhere. It was gone, offline, disabled, erased. And in that moment, the fear inside me sharpened into certainty. He didn't want me to know where he was. I tried to breathe through it, telling myself I was overthinking, that maybe his phone had died, maybe he really was working late. But my spirit, it wouldn't sit still. I've learned to trust that feeling, that quiet tightening inside my chest that has saved me more times than I can admit. I walked into the living room and sat in the dark, staring at the framed photos of our family lining the wall. Our wedding picture caught my eye, him smiling wide, me leaning into him with a trust that feels foreign to me now. I wondered when that man disappeared and who replaced him. I checked the time, 9:03 p.m., 3 hours late, 3 hours of silence, 3 hours of a truth that felt like it was closing in around me. And finally, I stood up, grabbed my keys, and whispered to myself, if there's nothing to hide, then let me see. The night air hit me like a cold warning when I stepped outside. The streets were unusually quiet, just the hum of distant traffic and the soft crunch of gravel under my shoes. I drove toward his office building, every passing streetlight cutting across my dashboard like flashes of truth I wasn't ready for. Memories of us laughing in that same car flickered through my mind, road trips, late night drives, small promises whispered between tired hearts. And now I was chasing a man whose silence had become a stranger. When I pulled into the parking lot, my hands went numb. His car wasn't there, not in his usual spot, not anywhere, just rows of empty spaces staring back at me like a confirmation I didn't want. My breath hitched. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice he made far away from me. I turned off my engine and sat there, watching the dark windows of the building, hoping, begging that he'd suddenly appear and make me feel foolish for doubting him. But the building stayed still, cold, untouched. I was seconds away from leaving when I heard something faint drifting across the alley, a laugh. Charles's laugh. Soft, familiar, the kind he only used when he felt safe. But it wasn't coming from the office. It was coming from the row of small restaurants tucked behind the building. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I stepped out of the car and followed the sound, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the glowing window of a quiet corner booth, I froze. There he was, leaning in, smiling, eyes warm. But the person sitting across from him wasn't a coworker. It was someone I knew, someone I trusted, and seeing them together made my whole body go cold. For a moment, I couldn't move. I pressed my hand lightly against the window frame, trying to steady myself as my mind scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. Charles wasn't just talking, he was leaning in. His shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. And the woman across from him, it was my niece, Alana, my sister's daughter, a young woman I'd helped raise, comforted, opened my home to. She laughed softly, touching her hair, her face glowing in the warm light of the booth. My stomach twisted so sharply, I had to bite my lip to stop a sound from escaping. A married man meeting with family at nearly 10 at night, whispering across a table like they shared a secret. My heart begged me to walk away. My spirit told me not to blink. I stepped back into the shadows, terrified they'd see me, terrified they wouldn't. My breath fogged against my mask as 1,000 memories of Alana flashed through my mind. The nights she cried on my couch, the mornings she sat at my kitchen table with cereal and unbrushed hair, the promises she made to me when she said she'd never betray blood. And now this. Charles let out another soft laugh, then reached across the table, his fingers brushing her wrist. It wasn't intimate, not yet, but it was familiar. Too familiar. A kind of comfort that doesn't grow overnight. I felt an ache rise from somewhere deep inside me. An ache I hadn't felt in years. The kind that tells you something has been wrong for a long time. You just didn't see it. The restaurant door opened suddenly, and I panicked, stepping behind a planter to hide myself. A couple walked out, laughing loudly, but their noise barely reached me through the pounding in my ears. I leaned forward again, watching as Charles slid a small envelope across the table toward Alana. She froze, glancing around like she knew it shouldn't be happening in public. She slipped the envelope straight into her purse. My knees weakened. This wasn't romance. This wasn't an affair. This was worse, a secret exchange, something guarded, something planned. Charles rubbed his forehead like the weight of it all was crushing him, and Alana covered his hand with hers, as if comforting him, comforting my husband. I felt the world tilt. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall, forcing myself to breathe. An envelope, a late-night meeting, a touch meant to soothe. I needed to know what was inside that envelope. I needed to understand why Charles would meet my niece behind my back. But more than that, I needed to understand why tears were burning behind my eyes, not from anger, but from something deeper, fear. Because if Charles was hiding something with Alana, it meant the fracture in my marriage ran far deeper than betrayal. It meant the truth had been living with us quietly, waiting for the right night to show its face. And tonight, it was sitting under warm restaurant lights, disguised as casual conversation. I forced myself away from the window before my legs gave out. The night felt colder, sharper, almost punishing as I walked to my car with steps I could barely control. I sat behind the wheel, chest tight, watching their silhouettes through the glass. Charles leaned back, looking exhausted, and Alana reached into her purse, perhaps to check the envelope, perhaps to hide it deeper. I couldn't tell. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I wanted to storm inside, demand answers, tear the truth out of both of them. But I knew better. I knew emotional chaos only hides the truth further. So I waited, watching the restaurant door, counting my breaths, waiting to see which one would walk out first and whether they'd leave separately or together. Either way, I knew the night wasn't done revealing itself. Minutes passed like hours as I kept my eyes on the restaurant entrance. Every time the door creaked open, my whole body tensed, expecting to see them walk out side by side. Instead, the minutes stretched into an ache. I watched Charles sit back, rubbing his jaw like a man wrestling with consequences he couldn't escape. Alana leaned in, whispering something that made him look away, his shoulders sinking. I felt my throat tighten, whispering. About what? My niece had never needed to whisper around me, not once in her life. My palms grew sweaty. Then the door finally opened, and Alana stepped out alone, her shoulders hunched, clutching her purse like she was protecting something fragile inside it, the envelope. She moved quickly, glancing around as though she feared someone, maybe even me, was watching. I ducked lower in my seat, heart pounding as I watched her hurry down the dim walkway. Her steps were fast, but not careless. She moved with intention, like she had somewhere she needed to be before the truth caught up to her. I debated opening my door, calling her name, confronting her right then. But my body wouldn't move. Something about the way she held that purse, it felt like she was carrying more than paper. She reached her car, fumbled with the keys, then paused, pressing her forehead against the door as if overwhelmed. For a moment, I saw the young girl she used to be, afraid and uncertain. Then she straightened, wiped her face, and drove off. I kept my eyes on the street she turned down, memorizing it. Wherever she was going, that was where the answers lived. A few minutes later, Charles finally stepped out of the restaurant. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't nervous. He looked defeated, like a man who had made a decision he couldn't take back. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the ground before pulling out his phone. I leaned forward, trying to see who he was calling, but he only held it to his ear for a second before lowering it again, shaking his head. No call, no message, just silence. He walked slowly to his car, his shoulders heavy, his steps uncertain. And that scared me more than anything. This wasn't the walk of a cheater. This was the walk of a man drowning in something deeper, something painful, something that might hurt all of us. I followed him at a safe distance. My lights dimmed. My hands trembled on the steering wheel each time we stopped at an intersection. Charles didn't drive toward home. He didn't drive toward his office either. Instead, He headed toward the outskirts of town, down a long, quiet stretch of road lined with empty lots and dark storage units. My breath hitched. Why come out here? What was he hiding that required isolation? He pulled into a nearly abandoned parking lot beside a closed hardware store and just sat there, engine running. I parked far enough away that he wouldn't see me. The soft glow from his dashboard lit his face, and I swear, he looked like he was about to break. What could possibly tie my husband and niece together in a secret that led him to sit alone in the dark like this? He rested his forehead on the steering wheel, shoulders shaking slightly. Not from crying, no. Charles wasn't a man who cried easily. This was something deeper, a kind of silent unraveling. I felt my stomach twist with a fear I couldn't name. I lowered my window just an inch, hoping to catch any hint of what he might mutter or whisper. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out another envelope identical to the one he'd given Alana. My breath stopped. 2 envelopes, 2 secrets, 2 burdens heavy enough to sink him. He stared at it for a long moment before gripping it tightly in both hands. Whatever was inside that envelope wasn't just harmful, it was life-changing, and I knew then I had to find out what he was hiding, even if it broke me. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, watching him through the windshield. He didn't move. He just sat there, head down, breathing unevenly. The envelope clutched against his chest, like a confession he couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. I wanted to call him out, to demand answers, but a voice inside me whispered, "Wait, patience. Let the truth unravel on its own." My stomach churned. Whatever was in that envelope, it wasn't something trivial. It carried weight enough to change everything: marriage, family, trust, all of it. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just witnessing betrayal. I was watching the slow reveal of a secret that had been living quietly in the shadows. Minutes crawled like hours. I felt trapped by the dark air around my car, my mask sticking to my face as I tried to calm my racing heart. Charles finally reached into the envelope and pulled out folded sheets of paper. His eyes scanned them, and I noticed the faint tremble in his hands. The tremble betrayed him more than words ever could. I had never seen him like this, so raw, so vulnerable, like a man who had built walls his entire life, and now realized they were crumbling. He folded the papers back and put them inside the envelope, staring at it as if it were a living thing, something capable of inflicting more pain than he could imagine. I realized then that this was bigger than an affair or a secret fling. This was a truth that could unravel everyone I loved. I leaned forward, straining to see the envelope in the dim dashboard glow. My pulse thumped painfully in my ears. I knew I shouldn't be here, that I was overstepping, but I couldn't stop myself. My hands gripped the wheel, nails biting into the leather. As Charles finally started the engine and drove slowly down the empty lot, his movements were careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic. He didn't glance in the rearview mirror, didn't signal. He was focused, calculating. I followed silently, holding my breath, dreading what I might discover. Every red light, every shadowed corner felt like a countdown to the revelation that would shatter our lives. And yet, some part of me couldn't turn away. He parked behind an abandoned warehouse, far from any streetlight. The darkness swallowed him, leaving only the faint glow of the envelope visible on the passenger seat. Charles stepped out and leaned against the hood, staring at the papers as if they were a prophecy he couldn't escape. I remained in my car, barely daring to breathe. The night seemed to hold its breath too. I felt the weight of every memory of him, our vows, our laughter, our long nights together, pressing down on me. And now this man, this husband I thought I knew, was staring into something I couldn't see, carrying a secret with Alana that could destroy everything. I realized then that the truth was far more dangerous than suspicion, far more painful. Suddenly, Charles reached for his phone again and made a call. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight shake of his hands. He spoke softly, carefully, like every word had to be weighed for consequences. My stomach lurched. Who could he be calling at this hour? And why did the words he didn't say feel louder than any confession? I felt a strange mix of anger and dread twisting in me. Anger for the secrecy, dread for the unknown that lay ahead. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to confront, to demand answers. But I stayed, frozen in the car, masked and hidden, because the truth, I realized, would reveal itself, whether I was ready or not. I watched him from the shadows, hands gripping the wheel of my car, heart hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it even from inside the warehouse lot. Charles's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, like he had rehearsed them 1,000 times. He reached again into his coat pocket, hesitated, and then finally pulled out the envelope, turning it in his hands as though weighing its contents against his soul. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just a secret he was protecting. It was a choice he had made, a choice that connected him to Alana in a way I still couldn't comprehend. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that the night wasn't over yet. Suddenly, he opened the envelope on the hood of his car and spread the papers carefully, almost reverently, as if revealing something sacred. I leaned forward, straining to see, my mask sticking to my face, the air thick with tension. The way he traced a finger across the sheets made my chest tighten. I could almost feel the weight of every secret embedded in those pages. My mind raced through possibilities, debts, threats, betrayals. Nothing seemed small enough to justify this careful secrecy. And yet, my heart whispered the truth I didn't want to admit. Whatever was in those papers had the power to change everything I thought I knew about him, about Alana, about us. Charles stepped back, envelope clutched tightly against his chest, and stared at the warehouse doors like he was about to step into a reckoning. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The night was silent, almost cruelly so, broken only by the distant hum of a passing car. I realized then that I wasn't just witnessing a secret. I was witnessing the weight of guilt and fear, the kind that bends a person slowly until they break inside. I wanted to shout, to confront him, to tear the papers from his hands, but my body refused. I was rooted to my spot, hidden behind my car, masked, silent, waiting for the next move that would either destroy or illuminate everything. After what felt like an eternity, he finally folded the papers back into the envelope, tucking them safely under his arm, and started walking toward the warehouse. Each step seemed heavier than the last, measured, careful, like a man walking to the edge of a cliff he couldn't turn away from. I followed him at a distance, pulse thrumming in my ears, every nerve alive with dread and curiosity. My mind spun with questions. Why here? Why now? What did Alana have to do with this? And the more I watched, the more certain I became that tonight wasn't just about discovery. It was about confrontation with truths no one had dared speak aloud for years. Charles stopped at the warehouse door, glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone or something to appear. The envelope pressed against his chest. He hesitated before slipping it under his jacket and stepping inside. The interior swallowed him in shadows, leaving only silence behind. I stayed in my car, straining to hear, every muscle taut, every instinct screaming at me that the real story was about to unfold. And then I remembered Alana's hurried steps, her clutching the other envelope like it contained the world. 2 envelopes, 2 people, 2 lives tangled in secrets so dangerous they could destroy the family we'd all depended on. I realized then that nothing would ever feel the same again. I waited in my car, the engine off, heart hammering so loudly I was sure the sound carried into the warehouse. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavier than the last. I couldn't leave. Not now, not when Charles was holding secrets that could unravel everything. I pictured Alana's face, her calm yet nervous composure, and wondered what part she played in this dark, silent exchange. The thought that my husband and my niece were both hiding something from me, something deliberate and dangerous, made my stomach twist. The air felt thick and suffocating, like it carried every lie ever told in our family. And in that oppressive silence, I realized I had no choice but to see this through. Finally, a faint light flickered from inside the warehouse, and I noticed Charles moving slowly toward a table near the back. I couldn't see much, only shadows, shapes, and the faint glint of something metallic. My chest ached as dread and curiosity battled inside me. I wanted to drive away, to escape the unbearable knowledge I might uncover, but my feet refused to obey. I stayed, masked, invisible, watching him unfold the envelope. His hands shook ever so slightly, betraying the weight of what he held. Every instinct told me to turn away, but my mind screamed at me to stay. This was the moment the truth could no longer hide. Charles placed the envelope on the table and opened it carefully. Papers slid out, folded with precision, almost ceremonial. I could see the faint outline of letters, numbers, documents, too distant to read, but enough to know these were not trivial notes. He traced them with his fingers, like memorizing something he had long hoped he'd never have to face. I felt a wave of nausea and fear wash over me, realizing the danger I was witnessing. Whatever was inside had the power to shatter lives, to burn down the trust we'd built over decades. My mind raced. Could this involve more than just him and Alana? Could it reach the rest of us? The air felt electric, thick with tension I could almost touch. I pressed my face closer to the windshield, my breath fogging the glass, heart hammering as I watched him. Charles wasn't alone anymore. Alana appeared from the shadows, moving quickly but silently toward the table. She reached for the envelope and paused, glancing over her shoulder as if sensing someone watching. My stomach plummeted. They were meeting in secret here, in this empty warehouse, under cover of night, handling something neither of us were meant to see. And in that moment, I felt the bitter weight of betrayal, not just fear or anger, but the ache of realizing the people you trust the most can hold your world in their hands and choose to break it. They stood across from each other, both tense, both careful, as though every movement carried consequences far beyond this room. Charles's jaw tightened, his fingers brushing the envelope as if it were alive, while Alana watched him with a kind of silent understanding I couldn't name. I felt my chest tighten, the ache spreading down to my stomach. The sight of them together, handling that secret, made me realize the depth of deception I'd been blind to. I wanted to step forward, demand answers, shout, collapse. But I stayed hidden, silent, masked, because I had to witness this. I had to see the truth, no matter how much it threatened to shatter the family I thought I knew. I stayed crouched in my car, heart hammering, watching them. Charles finally spoke, his voice low, careful, weighted with the burden of years. Alana leaned in, nodding slightly, her face calm but unreadable. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the energy between them, the unspoken understanding, the hidden arrangements, the quiet complicity that made my chest tighten. I pressed my hands against the wheel, wishing I could tear through the shadows and demand the truth, but I stayed hidden. The envelope sat between them like a silent witness, holding more than paper, holding trust, fear, and consequences that could devastate everyone I loved. Charles slid the envelope toward Alana. She picked it up carefully, as though touching it incorrectly could unleash disaster. My stomach lurched. This wasn't a normal secret. It was a secret heavy with power, influence, and danger. I imagined the contents: documents, plans, confessions. Something that could change lives, ruin reputations, or betray trust in a single sweep. The calm way she held it made it worse, too deliberate, too precise. Their faces were close now, voices still low, intent. I felt the ache in my chest deepen. My own family, people I thought I knew, now holding pieces of a puzzle that I had no part in, and yet my curiosity refused to let me turn away. Charles slid the envelope toward Alana. She picked it up carefully, as though touching it incorrectly could unleash disaster. My stomach lurched. This wasn't a normal secret. It was a secret heavy with power, influence, and danger. I imagined the contents: documents, plans, confessions. Something that could change lives, ruin reputations, or betray trust in a single sweep. The calm way she held it made it worse, too deliberate, too precise. Their faces were close now, voices still low, intent. I felt the ache in my chest deepen. My own family, people I thought I knew, now holding pieces of a puzzle that I had no part in, and yet my curiosity refused to let me turn away. Alana rose from the table slowly, envelope clutched to her chest. Charles followed, glancing around nervously, as if the night itself could hear their secrets. They moved together toward the warehouse exit, careful and deliberate. My pulse raced. I knew I shouldn't follow them further, but every instinct screamed that I had to see where they were going. I started the car, keeping distance, careful to remain invisible in the shadows. Each turn they made, each pause, felt like a countdown. I realized then the night had only just begun, that the story I thought I was witnessing in fragments was about to unfold fully, and the truth I feared would be impossible to ignore. They stopped at an abandoned building on the edge of town. My heart thudded so loudly I feared it would betray my presence. Charles stepped out, holding the envelope tightly, and Alana followed silently, her posture tense, controlled, almost like she had rehearsed every move. I watched as they disappeared into the darkness of the building, the faint glow of the envelope catching the weak light of a nearby street lamp. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching. I didn't know what awaited inside, but I knew it would change everything. The quiet was suffocating, thick with anticipation, and I felt the full weight of betrayal pressing on me, heavier than anything I had ever imagined. I parked my car a safe distance away, hands still trembling on the wheel, and forced myself to stay hidden. From my vantage point, I could see shadows move inside the building. Charles and Alana, both tense, deliberate, silent. The envelope was still in their possession, its presence a warning I couldn't ignore. I felt a deep ache in my stomach, a mixture of dread and anticipation, because I knew that whatever they were sharing inside those walls was not innocent, not trivial. And in that moment, I realized the truth would come out tonight, whether I was ready to witness it or not. And nothing in my life would ever feel the same again. The door to the building closed behind them with a faint click that echoed in the still night. I stayed crouched in my car, breath shallow, mask sticking to my skin. My mind raced with possibilities, each darker than the last. Whatever they were hiding, it wasn't something small. I pictured Charles and Alana leaning over that envelope, whispering, making decisions, weighing consequences that could destroy marriages, families, lives. I clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt. The night air felt suffocating, heavy, as if it knew the gravity of what was about to unfold. I wanted to flee, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but my body refused. I needed to witness the truth. Minutes crawled. Shadows shifted across the warehouse windows, illuminated only by the dim glow of the envelope on the table. Charles moved with slow deliberation, every gesture precise, as though the wrong move could undo everything. Alana mirrored him, calm but tense, her hands resting lightly on the papers, her eyes sharp, aware. I felt my stomach twist with dread. They weren't casual, weren't playful, they were calculating, and the thought that my niece and my husband were in this together, quietly conspiring, sent a chill down my spine. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, realizing the magnitude of what I was witnessing and the irreversible changes it could bring. I imagined the conversations I could never hear. Low, deliberate voices, careful words, each syllable a thread in a web I had no part in. My chest ached at the betrayal, not romantic, not trivial, but deep, subtle, woven into years of trust. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of my car, wishing I could disappear, yet unable to tear my eyes away. The envelope sat between them like a silent judge, holding secrets that threatened everything I had built with Charles. Every promise, every laugh, every moment I thought was shared honestly. I realized the danger wasn't just in their choices. It was in what they were willing to protect and hide from me. Suddenly, Charles stood, taking a step back from the table, and I felt my heart leap into my throat. He wasn't angry or happy. He was conflicted, a man torn by guilt and fear. Alana remained seated, calm but tense, holding the envelope close. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Every instinct screamed to run inside, to demand answers, to confront them. But I stayed hidden. I needed to watch. I needed to understand the depth of this secret. And as Charles ran a hand over his face, I realized that this night would not just expose a truth. It would fracture the fragile trust I had clung to for years, leaving nothing untouched. They gathered the envelope together, their movements synchronized, almost ritualistic. I could see the faint tension in Charles's shoulders, the way Alana's eyes flicked toward the entrance, as if checking for witnesses. I pressed my hands to my chest, heart hammering. This wasn't a private exchange. It was a moment of reckoning, a secret too powerful to stay hidden, yet carefully guarded. The warehouse seemed to pulse with their decisions, the air thick with the weight of concealed truths. I realized then that whatever was inside those pages would change everything, not just my marriage, but the very fabric of my family. And I knew deep in my bones that there was no turning back. Charles and Alana moved toward a corner of the warehouse where the shadows were deepest. I watched, breath held, every muscle tense. The envelope remained in Alana's hands, pressed to her chest like a lifeline. Charles's steps were heavy, deliberate, weighed down by something I couldn't yet name. I felt my stomach twist at the intimacy of their motions, not romantic, not innocent, but shared, deliberate, secret. I wanted to call out, to confront, to tear the envelope from them, but my body froze. The night held them in a silence thick with consequence. Whatever lay in that envelope, it carried the power to redefine everything I thought I knew about my husband, my family, and myself. I felt a shiver run through me as Charles finally opened the envelope again, this time revealing what seemed like multiple folded sheets. He scanned them quickly, then paused, running a hand across his face as if trying to erase the weight of what he read. Alana watched him closely, her expression unreadable, yet something in the set of her shoulders suggested control, understanding, even complicity. I pressed my mask against my face, heart hammering, unable to look away. The envelope wasn't just paper. It was a key to a truth that could destroy decades of trust. My mind raced with questions. What did he give her? What had she agreed to keep? And what would this night finally expose? They spoke low, careful, almost whispers that I couldn't hear, but felt in the tension vibrating through the room. Charles leaned back, jaw tight, as though struggling to contain guilt and fear simultaneously. Alana's hands rested lightly on the table, the envelope between them, her calm presence masking intentions I could not yet decipher. I felt an ache twist through me, a bitter mix of anger and dread. This wasn't just a secret. They were negotiating, conspiring, weighing consequences that would ripple through lives. My body ached with the knowledge that I was powerless to intervene. The night had turned into a silent battlefield, and I was watching from the shadows. They disappeared into the night together, the envelope hidden but palpable in my imagination. I started the car quietly, keeping distance, every nerve alert. My thoughts raced. What could Alana possibly be holding that required secrecy with my husband? Money, documents, a confession, a threat. The possibilities were endless, each darker than the last. I felt the ache of helplessness, the dread of discovering something I might never forgive, and yet I followed, unable to turn away, driven by the urgent need to see the full story unfold. Whatever awaited them and me tonight, I knew it would change everything. They drove down a quiet, nearly deserted road, headlights cutting through the darkness. I followed at a distance, careful not to be seen, every sense on high alert. Charles kept glancing at Alana, his face tight with tension, her expression calm yet calculating. The envelope remained hidden, a silent promise of secrets neither of them could yet speak aloud. I pressed my hands to the wheel, heart hammering. My mind raced. What had he entrusted to her? And why now, at this hour, in the shadows? The gravity of the moment weighed on me, heavier than I could bear, as I realized this night would expose truths that could never be unlearned. They pulled into a small, abandoned lot behind a shuttered shop. Charles killed the engine, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. I watched from the darkness, breath caught in my throat, as tension radiated off them like heat from a fire. Alana reached into her coat and brought out the envelope, setting it carefully on the hood. Charles's hands hovered over it for a second, hesitant. Then he finally opened it. The way they handled it, slowly, deliberately, made my chest tighten. This wasn't casual. This was a transaction of trust, power, and consequences. And I knew that whatever was about to be revealed would change everything. Inside the envelope, I imagined papers filled with names, numbers, confessions, pieces of a puzzle too dangerous for the light of day. Charles scanned them, lips pressed together, a low tension vibrating in his shoulders. Alana watched quietly, calm, attentive, almost commanding the room despite sitting across from him. I pressed my forehead to the glass of my car, heart hammering, realizing this was no longer a simple secret. This was a revelation, one that could fracture marriages, destroy relationships, and upend everything I had believed about my family. My hands shook, my breath hitched, but I couldn't turn away. I had to see the story unfold. They rose together, the envelope clasped tightly in Alana's hands, and walked toward the shadows beyond the lot. Charles followed, moving slowly, weighed down by unseen guilt and tension. I stayed back, engine off, watching, heart racing, stomach twisting with dread. Every instinct screamed at me to stop them, to demand answers, to tear the secret from their hands. But I remained hidden. The night was quiet, except for the soft rustle of their footsteps. But in my chest, a storm raged. I realized then that this wasn't just a late-night meeting. It was a turning point, the moment when hidden truths would finally emerge. Whether I was ready or not, they reached the far edge of the lot and paused, Alana holding the envelope as though it contained the world. Charles leaned toward her, whispering something I couldn't hear, and my chest tightened with a mix of fear, anger, and heartbreak. The weight of years of trust and betrayal pressed down on me. I stayed in the shadows, heart pounding, unable to move, yet unable to look away. The night had stretched into something unbearable, a slow revelation of truths too dangerous to face in daylight. I knew that whatever decision was being made in those few silent minutes would leave no one untouched. And I realized that the family I knew might never be the same again. Alana slipped the envelope under her coat, holding it close like it was a living thing. Charles's shoulders slumped, his face tight, every step heavy with tension. I stayed hidden in the shadows, heart racing, stomach twisting. I imagined the contents, whatever it was. It carried more power than any words could describe, enough to destroy marriages, friendships, and the fragile trust I'd built with Charles. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I considered confronting them, but instinct told me to wait, to follow silently, and let the truth reveal itself. One wrong move, one spoken word, and the fragile balance of this night would shatter forever. They moved toward a secluded part of town, the streets empty, the streetlights flickering weakly. Charles kept glancing at Alana, a mix of worry and anticipation etched into his face. The envelope was tucked tightly under her arm, a silent symbol of the secret they shared. I followed carefully, masked, invisible, each beat of my heart echoing loudly in the quiet night. I felt a deep ache, knowing the night would end with truths I might never forgive. And yet, a part of me couldn't look away, couldn't resist witnessing the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my husband, my niece, and the family I had always trusted. Finally, they stopped in front of a small, abandoned house, the kind of place forgotten by the world. Alana placed the envelope on a cracked wooden table outside, and Charles leaned in, whispering, his voice low, careful, waited. I stayed in my car, heart hammering, gripping the wheel as if it were the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I imagined their words, the silent negotiation, the hidden stakes. This wasn't casual, not trivial. It was deliberate, heavy, dangerous. And I realized the night would not end until the truth within that envelope was confronted, whether anyone was ready or not. Alana opened the envelope carefully, pulling out the contents one by one. Charles leaned over, tracing the papers with his fingers, eyes narrowing, jaw tight. I felt the tension radiating through the air, a weight so thick it pressed against my chest. I wanted to call out, to demand answers, to storm in. But I stayed hidden, silent, masked. Each movement, each glance between them, told a story of secrecy and consequence far greater than I could imagine. My mind spun, piecing together fragments of what might be inside. Confessions, documents, proof of a hidden life. The realization struck me hard. This night could destroy everything I loved in a single instant. They stepped back from the table, the envelope held carefully between them like a fragile secret. Charles rubbed his forehead, shoulders tense, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime of guilt. Alana's eyes were calm, calculating, yet I could sense the tension in her posture, the care with which she handled this secret. I stayed in the shadows, my heart pounding, stomach twisting, knowing the truth was about to be revealed. This was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was survival, trust, betrayal, all rolled into a single moment. And I realized that by witnessing it, I had already become a part of the story I had feared to see unfold. They started walking toward the edge of the property, the envelope still pressed between them. Charles's shoulders were heavy, each step slow, deliberate, weighed with regret. Alana's calm composure made it worse, too precise, too confident, like she knew the full measure of what she held. I stayed hidden, heart hammering, stomach tight, knowing that what I was about to witness would be irreversible. Every instinct screamed at me to intervene, to stop them, to reclaim the life I thought I had, but I couldn't. I was only a spectator to the unraveling, and the silence of the night pressed down on me like judgment itself. Alana finally stopped and opened the envelope, pulling out its contents with meticulous care. Charles leaned over, eyes scanning the papers, jaw tight, every muscle rigid with tension. I pressed my forehead to the car window, unable to look away, realizing the truth was far worse than I imagined. This wasn't a hidden fling, a trivial lie, or a minor deception. It was a secret so carefully guarded, so deliberate, that it had the power to destroy everything I thought I knew about my husband, about Alana, about family. I felt the cold sting of betrayal, a mixture of disbelief and sorrow, and knew nothing could erase the night's revelations. For a long moment, they stood in silence, exchanging glances that spoke more than words could. The envelope rested between them like a fulcrum, tipping the balance of trust and secrecy. I could feel the weight of every hidden choice pressing on my chest. Charles rubbed his eyes, shoulders heavy with guilt, while Alana's calm, measured stance hinted at understanding, perhaps control. I stayed hidden, trembling, knowing that whatever had been concealed for years was now being handled in plain sight, a secret too dangerous to ignore. And I realized, with a sinking heart, that this night would change us all forever. They finally turned to leave, envelope secured, steps deliberate and measured. My heart ached with the knowledge that I had seen too much, yet not enough to fully grasp the magnitude of the secret. Every instinct screamed that the truth inside those papers could shatter lives, yet I couldn't look away. The night had revealed fragments, but the consequences would unfold slowly, insidiously. I pressed my hands to my face, feeling the weight of betrayal, fear, and helplessness pressing in. One truth had been exposed, but the ripple effect was only beginning. I realized that tomorrow, our lives would no longer be the same. The house behind them grew silent as they disappeared into the shadows, envelope in hand. I sat in my car, chest tight, heart heavy, mask clinging to my face. Tears pricked my eyes as I realized the full scope of the night, hidden truths, deliberate secrets, and betrayals that would haunt us forever. I whispered a quiet goodbye to the life I thought I knew, letting the night hold my sorrow. Thank you for witnessing this story with me. Remember to subscribe and join me as we uncover more hidden truths together. Life doesn't always reveal itself gently, but the lessons are unforgettable.